Nathaniel immediately mobilized his organization's full security resources, understanding clearly that the Kozlov organization's renewed determination represented a considerably more dangerous threat than their initial attempt through Victor's compromised assistance. "I want the estate security tripled," Nathaniel instructed Marcus firmly. "Every entrance monitored, every approach covered. If the Kozlovs are genuinely planning direct action, I won't allow them any opportunity to reach Grace again." "Understood, sir," Marcus confirmed, already coordinating the necessary additional personnel and equipment throughout the property. Grace, listening to these urgent preparations with genuine mounting anxiety, found herself increasingly grateful for Nathaniel's protective determination despite her own exhaustion regarding the seemingly endless danger surrounding her circumstances. "How long will this continue?" she asked quietly, genuine weariness evident in her voice. "This constant threat, this endless danger simply because of information I never even knew I possessed?" Nathaniel's expression carried genuine sympathy alongside his controlled determination. "I intend to resolve this completely," he said firmly. "Not simply defensive protection, but decisive action that ensures the Kozlov organization understands absolutely that threatening you carries consequences severe enough to discourage any future consideration of similar action." "What does that mean practically?" Grace asked, genuine concern evident in her careful question. "It means," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying deadly, controlled promise, "that rather than simply waiting for their next attempt, I intend to proactively address this threat directly, on my own terms rather than reactively responding to whatever dangerous action they're currently planning." Over the following 2 days, Nathaniel's organization worked methodically to gather intelligence regarding the Kozlov organization's specific plans, Victor's continued cooperation under careful, controlled questioning providing valuable insight into their leadership structure and likely operational approach. According to Victor's information, Marcus reported during an urgent strategic briefing, Dmitry Kozlov himself is personally overseeing this operation, given how significantly their previous attempt through Victor has already failed. They're planning to approach the estate directly within the next 48 hours, believing our security remains primarily focused on external threats rather than anticipating this kind of direct, aggressive confrontation. Then we ensure they're considerably surprised by exactly how prepared we actually are, Nathaniel said, genuine calculated determination evident in his careful planning. As Nathaniel's security team prepared comprehensive defensive measures throughout the estate, Grace found herself increasingly drawn into the practical necessities of this dangerous confrontation despite her understandable desire to simply escape the constant threat surrounding her circumstances. "I want to help however I can," she told Nathaniel during one of their strategic planning sessions. "Even if that simply means providing whatever information might prove useful regarding my previous interactions with the shipping manifests they're apparently so determined to access." "Your safety remains the absolute priority," Nathaniel reminded her gently. "Though I genuinely appreciate your willingness to contribute, given everything you've already endured." On the second night following their intelligence gathering, exactly as Victor's information had suggested, Nathaniel's security team detected unusual activity along the estate's eastern perimeter, multiple vehicles approaching with a careful, coordinated precision suggesting organized, deliberate assault rather than simple, opportunistic attack. "They're here," Marcus reported urgently, alerting Nathaniel to the confirmed approach, consistent with Victor's intelligence regarding their planned timeline and approach vector. "Position everyone according to our prepared defensive strategy," Nathaniel instructed calmly, genuine controlled focus evident despite the obvious danger rapidly approaching. "I want Grace moved to the secure safe room immediately." Grace, despite genuine fear building rapidly at this confirmation of the anticipated threat, found herself guided quickly toward the estate's reinforced safe room, though she couldn't entirely suppress her instinct to remain informed about the unfolding confrontation rather than simply hiding passively while others risked their safety on her behalf. The confrontation, when it finally erupted, proved considerably more contained and controlled than the Kozlov organization had apparently anticipated, Nathaniel's superior preparation and defensive positioning providing significant tactical advantage despite the attackers' initial confidence in their carefully planned approach. Dmitry Kozlov himself, coordinating the assault from a position he believed offered relative safety, found his forces increasingly overwhelmed by Nathaniel's considerably more disciplined and thoroughly prepared security response. "This isn't proceeding as planned," one of Dmitry's lieutenants reported urgently, genuine alarm evident as their forces struggled against Nathaniel's superior defensive coordination. "Push forward regardless," Dmitry commanded sharply, genuine frustration evident in his controlled voice despite the obviously deteriorating tactical situation. Within 20 minutes, however, the confrontation's outcome had become undeniably clear, Nathaniel's forces successfully containing and ultimately overwhelming the Kozlov assault team, several attackers captured while others retreated in obvious disarray given the confrontation's unexpected, decisive resolution favoring Nathaniel's superior preparation. Dmitri himself, recognizing the complete collapse of his carefully planned operation, attempted a desperate retreat, though Nathaniel's security team had anticipated exactly this possibility, successfully intercepting his escape. Antonio stood slowly from the table, his mind already racing through the dangerous implications of what his sister had just revealed, understanding clearly that this single piece of information had the power to reignite a war between two powerful families that had remained fragile and tense for far too long. Antonio did not sleep that night. He sat alone in his study long after Isabella had gone to bed, staring at old photographs of his parents, remembering stories his father once told him about the bitter feud between the Moretti and Castellano families, a rivalry stretching back nearly 30 years, born from betrayal, stolen territory, and blood spilled on both sides. And now, his own sister carried the child of their greatest enemy. He poured himself a drink, though he barely touched it, his mind replaying Isabella's words again and again. "I love him, Antonio." How had this happened? How had his careful, protected younger sister found herself connected so intimately to a Castellano, of all people? Upstairs, Isabella lay awake in her bed, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, her mind drifting back to the moment everything had begun, nearly 7 months earlier. Flashback. 7 months ago. Isabella had attended a charity gala downtown, one of the rare social events where families from different corners of the city's underworld gathered together under a temporary, uneasy truce. She remembered feeling out of place that evening, uncomfortable in her formal dress, wishing she could simply return home to her books instead. That was when she noticed him, a tall, quiet man standing near the edge of the room, seemingly as uncomfortable with the event as she felt herself. Something about his calm, thoughtful expression intrigued her immediately. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she had said, approaching him with a small, teasing smile. He had turned, mild surprise crossing his features before a genuine smile replaced it. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone feeling exactly the same way," Isabella had replied. They spent nearly an hour talking that night, carefully avoiding any mention of their families, simply enjoying an easy, unexpected connection neither had experienced in a long time. It wasn't until the end of the evening, when he introduced himself properly, that Isabella realized exactly who she had been speaking with. Alessandro Castellano, son of her family's oldest rival. She should have walked away immediately. Every instinct, every lesson Antonio had taught her about protecting their family, told her to end the conversation right there and never speak to him again. Instead, she agreed to see him once more. Over the following months, their secret meetings became more frequent, careful and hidden, always in places far from either family's watchful eyes. What began as innocent curiosity slowly transformed into something neither of them expected nor fully understood, a genuine, deep connection built entirely outside the violent world both families represented. "We shouldn't be doing this," Isabella had whispered one evening, sitting beside Alessandro in a quiet park far from the city center. "Probably not," Alessandro had agreed softly, though he made no move to leave. "But I don't think I've ever felt this way before, Isabella. Not with anyone. If our families ever found out." "I know," Alessandro had said quietly, his expression serious. "But maybe, for once, we deserve something that belongs only to us. Something not defined by our family's history." End of flashback. Isabella wiped a tear from her cheek, remembering the gentle way Alessandro had always spoken to her, so different from the cold, calculated men she had grown up surrounded by within her own family. He had never once made her feel like a pawn in some larger game. He had simply made her feel loved. Now, carrying his child, she understood clearly that their careful secret could no longer remain hidden, regardless of the dangerous consequences that truth might bring. The next morning, Antonio called an emergency meeting with his most trusted advisor, Salvatore, a man who had served their family loyally since before Antonio himself had taken control of the organization. "The Castellano boy," Antonio said grimly, pacing across his study. "Alessandro. What do you know about him?" Salvatore's expression grew cautious. "Quiet. Educated abroad for several years. Not as aggressive as his father or older brothers. Some say he's never been fully comfortable with the family business." Isabella says she loves him, Antonio said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. Says he's different from the rest of his family. Salvatore studied his boss carefully. What do you intend to do, Antonio? Antonio remained silent for a long moment, staring out his study window at the quiet street below. I need to understand exactly what kind of man could earn my sister's trust so completely, despite everything she knows about our family's history. You're going to speak with him directly? Salvatore asked, clearly surprised by the suggestion. Not directly, Antonio said carefully. Not yet. First, I need to understand exactly how serious this connection truly is, and whether Alessandro even knows about the child yet. Salvatore's eyebrows rose slightly. You think she hasn't told him? I don't know, Antonio admitted honestly. But before I decide how to handle this situation, I need every piece of information available. This isn't simply about my sister's happiness anymore, Salvatore. If word spreads that a Moretti carries a Castellano's child, both families could face serious instability, potentially even violence from those who prefer the old conflicts remain unresolved. That same afternoon, Isabella received an unexpected message on her phone, a simple text from an unknown number. We need to talk. It's important. Meet me at our usual place, tonight. She recognized the phrasing immediately, understanding it could only be from Alessandro, though he had never contacted her through an unfamiliar number before. Nervous but curious, Isabella arrived at their secret meeting spot that evening, finding Alessandro waiting for her, his expression troubled and tense in a way she had never witnessed before. What's wrong? Isabella asked immediately. Circumstances. Grace found herself genuinely grateful for the strength she discovered within herself throughout the entire ordeal. Do you ever think about that night? She asked softly, genuine curiosity evident in her voice. When everything first happened? Constantly, Nathaniel admitted, genuine warmth evident in his expression despite the difficult memory. Though what I remember most clearly isn't simply the fear or anger I felt learning what happened to you, but rather the moment I realized exactly how much you meant to me, considerably beyond anything I'd properly acknowledged before that terrifying phone call. I remember feeling so frightened, Grace admitted, but also, somehow, knowing you would come, that you would ensure I received proper care and protection. I will always come for you, Nathaniel said firmly, genuine promise evident in his sincere words. Whatever danger might threaten your safety in the future, I promise you, Grace, I will always protect you with everything I possess. Grace smiled softly, genuine contentment evident in her expression as she considered the remarkable, unlikely journey that had transformed such a frightening, traumatic experience into the foundation for genuine, lasting love. I never imagined that surviving something so terrifying would eventually lead me here, to this genuinely meaningful life I've built alongside you. Neither did I, Nathaniel admitted honestly, though I've never once regretted the remarkable, unexpected connection that emerged from such difficult circumstances. As they sat together in comfortable, meaningful silence, watching the evening sky gradually shift toward gentle darkness above the peaceful garden, both Nathaniel and Grace understood clearly that sometimes the most profound, lasting connections arrived through the most unexpected, dangerous circumstances, transforming individual lives in ways neither could have anticipated before that frightening night that changed everything between them. The brutal attack that had once threatened to destroy Grace's sense of safety and security had ultimately revealed not just the depth of Nathaniel's genuine devotion, but the beginning of something considerably more meaningful, a partnership built through shared adversity, genuine courage, and the willingness to protect what truly mattered regardless of whatever danger threatened to interfere. Sometimes, Grace reflected, watching Nathaniel's genuine, contented expression in the gentle evening light, the most meaningful love stories don't begin with grand romantic gestures, but rather through the quiet, determined courage to protect someone genuinely worth protecting, revealing depths of devotion neither person fully understood until circumstances forced that truth into undeniable clarity. I wasn't given much choice, Antonio replied evenly. Given the circumstances. Don Castellano nodded slowly, understanding the underlying tension clearly. Our children have placed us in a difficult position, Antonio. One that could either reignite our family's old conflicts, or potentially offer an unexpected opportunity for lasting peace. You're suggesting peace? Antonio asked, skepticism evident in his tone. After 30 years of conflict between our families? I'm suggesting practicality, Don Castellano replied carefully. My son loves your sister. Genuinely, deeply, in a way I have rarely witnessed in our world. And regardless of our personal feelings about this situation, a child will soon exist connecting our families permanently, whether either of us prefers that reality or not. Antonio studied the older man carefully, searching for hidden manipulation behind his words, though he found only calculated honesty instead. What exactly are you proposing? A truce, Don Castellano said firmly. Formal, permanent, sealed through the marriage of our children, if they both agree. Our families have lost too much through decades of unnecessary conflict, Antonio. Perhaps it's time we considered a different path forward, for the sake of the child who will soon connect us permanently regardless of our decision. Antonio remained silent, carefully weighing the enormous implications of such a proposal. Ending 30 years of conflict would require enormous trust that history had given him little reason to extend easily toward the Castellano family. I need to speak with Isabella first, Antonio said finally. This decision isn't mine to make alone, not entirely. And I assume you'll speak with Alessandro as well. Of course, Don Castellano agreed. But Antonio, understand this clearly. Not everyone within either of our organizations will welcome this kind of resolution easily. There are those who have profited from our ongoing conflict, who might see peace between our families as a direct threat to their own interests and influence. Antonio nodded slowly, understanding the warning clearly. Even if he and Don Castellano reached a peaceful agreement personally, dangerous forces within both organizations might still attempt to prevent that peace from ever truly taking hold. As both men prepared to leave the warehouse, each returning to discuss this unprecedented proposal with their respective families, neither fully realized that someone else within the shadows had been listening carefully to their entire conversation, someone with very different plans for how this situation between the Moretti and Castellano families should ultimately unfold. The man hiding in the shadows of the warehouse was Vincent Greco, a long-time lieutenant within the Castellano organization. A man who had served Don Castellano's own father decades earlier during the bloodiest years of the feud with the Morettis. He had lost his younger brother during that violent conflict, killed by Moretti men in a dispute over territory that had never truly healed within Vincent's heart, despite the passage of many years. He waited until both groups had fully departed before slipping out quietly, his mind racing with fury and calculated determination. Peace between the families was unacceptable to him, a betrayal of everything his brother had died fighting for. He needed to act quickly, before this fragile truce could take hold and destroy any chance of the revenge he had quietly craved for over 15 years. The next morning, Antonio sat down with Isabella in the quiet privacy of her bedroom, carefully explaining Don Castellano's unexpected proposal. Marriage? Isabella asked, surprise and cautious hope mixing across her face. He actually suggested a truce, sealed through marriage? He did, Antonio confirmed, studying his sister carefully. But Isabella, I need to know something honestly. Is this truly what you want? Not simply for the sake of peace between our families, but for yourself, for your own happiness. Isabella considered the question seriously before answering. I love Alessandro, Antonio. I have from the very beginning, long before I understood the complications our families would bring into this. If marrying him also brings peace between our families, allows our child to grow up without the constant threat of violence hanging over their future, then yes, this is exactly what I want. Antonio studied his sister carefully, recognizing genuine conviction behind her words rather than simple naive hope. Then I'll support your decision, Isabella. But we need to move carefully. Not everyone will welcome this peace easily. Meanwhile, across the city, Alessandro sat with his father, discussing the same unprecedented proposal. You're certain about this? Don Castellano asked his son directly. Marriage isn't simply about personal happiness, Alessandro. It carries serious responsibility, especially considering the history between our families. I've never been more certain about anything, Alessandro replied firmly. I love Isabella, father. And our child deserves a chance to grow up in a world where their parents' families aren't constantly at war with each other. Don Castellano nodded slowly, something resembling genuine pride briefly crossing his usually controlled expression. Then we proceed carefully, formally, ensuring both families understand this arrangement represents strength and wisdom, not weakness. Their conversation was interrupted suddenly by Marco, rushing into the room with visible alarm. Father, we have a problem. Vincent Greco has disappeared. Nobody has seen him since last night. Don Castellano's expression darkened immediately. Vincent was at the warehouse last night. You think he overheard your conversation with Antonio? Marco asked. I think, Don Castellano said grimly, we need to find him immediately, before he decides to act on old grudges that could destroy everything we're trying to build. That evening, as Isabella walked home from a quiet visit with Alessandro, discussing wedding plans despite the uncertainty still surrounding their family's fragile truce, a black car suddenly pulled up beside her on the quiet street. Before she could react, two men emerged quickly, forcing her into the vehicle despite her attempts to resist. Let me go, Isabella shouted, struggling against their grip. Quiet, one of the men said sharply, though his voice carried unmistakable nervousness rather than confidence. Isabella recognized him vaguely from previous encounters within Castellano territory, understanding immediately that these men worked for Vincent Greco, not for Don Castellano directly. She was taken to an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, where Vincent Greco waited, his expression cold and determined. Isabella Moretti, Vincent said, his voice carrying quiet menace. The woman who thinks she can simply erase 30 years of blood and conflict through a convenient marriage. What do you want? Isabella demanded, fear evident despite her attempt to remain composed. I want justice, Vincent said firmly. For my brother, killed by your family's men 15 years ago. Justice your family and mine seem determined to forget through this ridiculous peace arrangement. Isabella's hand instinctively moved to protect her stomach. This child has nothing to do with what happened 15 years ago. This child, Vincent said coldly, represents exactly the kind of betrayal that dishonors everyone who ever sacrificed something in this conflict. I intend to make sure that betrayal never comes to fruition. Back at the Moretti mansion, Antonio grew increasingly alarmed when Isabella failed to return home at her expected time. He called Alessandro immediately, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Isabella never made it home, Antonio said urgently. Is she still with you? No, Alessandro replied, immediate concern flooding his voice. She left almost 2 hours ago. Antonio, we just learned that Vincent Greco has gone missing from our organization. My father believes he might be planning something against your family. Antonio's blood ran cold. You think he's taken Isabella? I think, Alessandro said grimly, we need to find her immediately, before Vincent does something we cannot undo. Both families mobilized quickly, setting aside decades of mutual distrust for the first time in their shared history, working together urgently to locate Isabella before Vincent's dangerous plan could unfold completely. Inside the abandoned building, Isabella remained as calm as possible despite her racing heart, understanding clearly that panicking would only make her situation more dangerous. Killing me won't bring your brother back, Isabella said carefully, studying Vincent's expression for any sign of hesitation. No, Vincent agreed coldly. But it will ensure your families never forget the price of betrayal, the same price my family paid 15 years ago. And what about my child? Isabella asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her effort to remain strong. An innocent life, about to enter a world already burdened with enough unnecessary violence. Is that truly the legacy you want to create for your own brother's memory? Vincent hesitated, something flickering uncertainly behind his cold determination. For the first time since taking her, genuine doubt crossed his expression. "Your brother," Isabella continued carefully, sensing the crack in his resolve, "died because of endless cycles of revenge and violence between our families. Don't you think it's time someone finally broke that cycle, instead of continuing it?" Before Vincent could respond, the sound of multiple vehicles arriving outside interrupted the tense standoff. Moments later, the door burst open, revealing both Antonio and Alessandro, accompanied by armed men from both families, standing together for the first time in 30 years. "It's over, Vincent," Antonio said firmly, his eyes immediately searching for his sister's safety. Vincent looked between the unprecedented alliance standing before him, understanding clearly that his plan had already failed completely. "This isn't justice," Vincent said quietly, lowering the weapon he had been holding. "It's surrender." "No," Alessandro said firmly, moving carefully toward Isabella to ensure her safety. "It's peace, Vincent. Something your brother, and countless others on both sides, deserved a long time ago." As Isabella finally found safety within Alessandro's protective embrace, both families realized clearly that surviving this dangerous night together had changed something fundamental between them, forging an unexpected bond through shared fear and mutual protection that neither Moretti nor Castellano had ever experienced before. Sarah Bennet stood trembling in the dimly lit living room, listening as her father spoke words that would change her entire life forever. "It's the only way," he said, refusing to meet her eyes. "The debt is too large. We have no other choice." Sarah's father, Thomas Bennet, had borrowed a significant amount of money 2 years earlier from a dangerous man named Antonio Russo, one of the city's most powerful and feared crime bosses. What started as a small business loan had grown impossibly large due to unpaid interest and desperate, poor decisions. Now, with collectors demanding immediate payment, Thomas had made a desperate, unforgivable choice. "You're giving me to him?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking with disbelief and betrayal. "Like property?" "It's not like that," her mother said weakly, though she too refused to look directly at her daughter. "Antonio agreed to erase the debt completely in exchange for your company." Sarah felt her entire world collapsing around her. She was only 23 years old, working a simple job at a local bookstore, dreaming of a quiet, ordinary life. She had never imagined her own parents would sacrifice her safety and freedom to escape their financial troubles. "How could you do this to me?" Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. Her father finally looked up, guilt evident in his tired eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah. Truly sorry. But if we don't pay this debt immediately, Antonio's men have threatened to destroy everything, our home, our business, possibly even our lives." Sarah wanted to scream, to run away, to refuse completely. But looking at her parents' desperate, frightened faces, she understood clearly there was no other realistic option remaining. Reluctantly, with her heart shattered and her future uncertain, she agreed to meet Antonio Russo the following evening. The meeting took place at a luxurious restaurant downtown, a place far beyond anything Sarah had ever experienced in her simple, modest life. She sat nervously at a private table, waiting anxiously for the dangerous man who now controlled her entire future. When Antonio finally arrived, Sarah expected someone cruel, cold, and intimidating, exactly the type of man capable of destroying her family's life so completely. Instead, she was surprised to see a tall, composed man with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, controlled demeanor that somehow felt far less threatening than she anticipated. "Sarah," Antonio greeted politely, sitting down across from her. "Thank you for coming." Sarah studied him cautiously, her guard remaining firmly in place. "I didn't exactly have a choice." Antonio's expression flickered slightly, something unreadable passing behind his sharp gaze. "I understand your anger," he said calmly. "But let me explain something clearly, Sarah. I never asked your father for you specifically." Sarah blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "Your father came to me directly," Antonio explained. "Desperate, terrified of losing everything. He offered your companionship as collateral, believing it would satisfy the debt more quickly than continued financial struggle." Sarah felt anger boiling within her chest. "So my own father sold me to save himself." Antonio remained silent for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the situation despite his controlled exterior. "I won't pretend this situation is fair to you, Sarah. It isn't. But I want you to understand something important. I don't intend to force you into anything against your will." Sarah studied him carefully, uncertain whether to trust his calm, reasonable words. "Then why bring me here at all?" Antonio considered his answer carefully. "Because your father's debt is real, and it needs resolution. But instead of treating you as payment, I'm offering you a choice instead." "What choice?" Sarah asked cautiously. "You can work for me," Antonio explained. "A legitimate position, managing certain aspects of my legal business operations. In exchange, I'll consider your father's debt completely settled." Sarah hesitated, surprised by the unexpected offer. "Why would you do that? Why not simply demand the money directly?" Antonio's expression grew serious, something deeper flickering behind his controlled gaze. "Because forcing someone into an unwanted arrangement has never interested me, Sarah. I prefer loyalty earned honestly, rather than obligation forced through fear or desperation." Sarah considered his words carefully, cautious optimism slowly replacing her initial fear and anger. "And if I refuse your offer completely?" "Then you're free to leave," Antonio said simply. "Though your father's debt will remain unresolved, and I cannot guarantee what consequences he might face from other collectors less patient than myself." Sarah felt the weight of an impossible decision. Antonio kept his word. The next morning, Sarah arrived at his private office downtown, where he presented her with a complete debt agreement, every detail clearly outlined in writing. She read through the document carefully, verifying the exact amount her father owed and the specific terms Antonio proposed in exchange for her employment. "This seems legitimate," Sarah admitted cautiously, setting the papers down on his desk. "But I still don't fully understand why you're offering me an actual job instead of simply demanding immediate payment." Antonio studied her carefully, his expression thoughtful. "Because desperate men make poor decisions, Sarah. Your father borrowed money he couldn't repay, then offered something he had no right to offer. I could have simply taken the debt through force, but that's not how I choose to operate." Sarah considered his words carefully, gradually beginning to trust his calm, measured approach. "All right," she said finally. "I accept your offer. When do I start?" "Today, if you're ready," Antonio said, gesturing toward a small office adjacent to his own. "You'll be working closely with me, managing schedules, organizing documents, and occasionally attending meetings requiring careful discretion." Sarah nodded, accepting the position despite her lingering uncertainty about the dangerous world she was now entering. Over the following weeks, she settled gradually into her new role, discovering that much of Antonio's daily business dealings involved legitimate operations, real estate investments, restaurant ownership, and various legal enterprises that provided steady income far removed from the criminal reputation she initially expected. However, Sarah quickly learned that beneath Antonio's legitimate business activities existed a far more dangerous world, one involving rival crime families, dangerous negotiations, and constant, careful vigilance against potential threats. One afternoon, while organizing financial documents in Antonio's private office, Sarah overheard a tense conversation between Antonio and one of his top associates, discussing a dangerous rival named Victor Moreno, who had recently begun making aggressive moves against Antonio's territory and business interests. "Victor's getting bolder," the associate warned. "If we don't respond soon, he'll continue testing our boundaries." "I'm aware," Antonio replied calmly, though tension clearly lingered beneath his controlled voice. "We'll handle it carefully, without unnecessary violence, if possible." Sarah listened quietly, growing concerned about the dangerous world she now found herself unexpectedly involved within. Despite her initial fears, she had begun developing genuine respect and even admiration for Antonio's careful, thoughtful leadership style, noticing clearly how he consistently sought peaceful resolutions whenever possible, rather than resorting immediately to violence or intimidation. As weeks passed into months, Sarah's relationship with Antonio gradually shifted from cautious professionalism into something warmer, more comfortable. They began sharing quiet lunches together, discussing business matters, personal interests, and occasionally, deeper conversations about their individual pasts and hopes for the future. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah asked one afternoon, as they shared a quiet lunch in his office. "Of course," Antonio replied, curiosity evident in his expression. "Why did you choose this life?" Sarah asked carefully. "The business, the danger, all of it?" Antonio's expression grew thoughtful, momentarily distant. "My father built this organization from nothing, protecting our family and community from far more dangerous, ruthless criminals who once controlled this city. When he passed away, the responsibility fell naturally to me. Do you ever wish you had chosen differently?" Sarah asked gently. Antonio considered her question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted honestly. "But this life, despite its dangers, has allowed me to protect people who matter to me, people like you, Sarah." Sarah felt warmth spreading through her chest at his sincere words, surprised by how quickly her initial fear and resentment had transformed into genuine trust and admiration. However, their peaceful routine was abruptly interrupted one evening when Antonio received an urgent, troubling phone call. His expression darkened rapidly as he listened carefully to the concerning news. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked immediately, noticing his obvious tension. Antonio lowered his phone slowly, his sharp eyes filled with serious concern. "Victor Moreno," he said grimly. "He's discovered your connection to me, Sarah. Your family's debt, your new position here, everything." Sarah felt fear rushing through her body instantly. "What does that mean?" Antonio's jaw tightened, protective instincts immediately activating. "It means Victor believes he's found a valuable weakness to exploit against me, someone he might try using to gain leverage in our ongoing conflict." "What kind of leverage?" Sarah asked, though she already feared she understood the dangerous answer. Antonio met her gaze directly, seriousness evident in his controlled expression. "Victor Moreno may attempt to kidnap you, Sarah, believing your safety holds enough value to force me into surrendering territory or resources.